Okay, so this graph is showing us how it's showing us 5 centuries essentially of human population growth. So this red line here being the total population size projected out through 2050. And then the blue hash lines beginning in about 1750, we have a good idea of how much the population was actually increasing. So this is the actual increase in population and then the actual total population. So if we started with about, I think about 480 million people back in 1500 and to our current population of about almost 7.5 million. What this was, remember our G equals Rn. So what this takes into account is that R was remaining pretty constant, and as the number increased, this growth rate increased as well. So this was the case throughout most of history because parents were having many children, but mortality was also high. So that R rate was, for quite a long time, was not much bigger than 0. So this growth rate for a couple hundred years was remaining pretty steady. We actually didn't reach the 1 billion mark until the early 19th century. So somewhere around in here, we saw 1 billion people globally. But as economic development in Europe and the United States led to advances in nutrition and sanitation and even medical care, that rate of increase that R value started to get bigger. We were seeing more growth and more numbers. So we can see that there was this uptick around the 20th century. So as the world population skyrocketed from about 2 billion in around 1927 to 3 billion only 33 years later, people started to become alarmed that we were kind of nearing Earth's carrying capacity for the human population. So as we project these numbers further, and as, again, nutrition is getting better in developing countries, these projections are really important to determine how quickly we will be reaching our carrying capacity. And going back to that idea of demographic transition, this is a graph that actually shows you that demographic transition. This is in Mexico, and this is just showing that since 1900, there's been a big decrease in birth rate and also, as well as a decrease in death rate, where they're starting to balance out with one another. And as I mentioned, those demographic transitions don't happen the same way all over the world. So economic development has happened in different times and in different regions. So the more developed countries are reaching a completion of their demographic transition. And what we're talking about there, we have in more developed nations, the birth rate and the death rate are starting to balance out a bit. So our rate of increase is at about 0.8. So that's a 0.8% so 0.8 people per 1,000 people. Whereas in less developed nations, birth rates remain high. Death rates are pretty low because of, again, improvements to sanitation and medical care and things like that. But the birth rates still remain high due to lack of education and availability to contraception and things like that. So what we see in developing nations is that R number is remaining extremely high, which is concerning, again, for future generations and how sustainable this will be as a strategy to conserve for future populations. So As I mentioned, the human population continues to increase, but that rate is trending towards slowing. And one of the things that we also look at in population dynamics are the age structures of population. So that's how many individuals are from different age groups. And those numbers also affect future growth. If a population is much, much older, you'll expect that it's not going to grow as rapidly because folks in their reproductive years make up the bulk of a population. So this population momentum, this idea that continued growth is occurring, it's usually resulting in communities where there are a larger population of people in their childbearing years. So we can use diagrams of populations' growth trends and different social conditions to understand what the needs might be for schools and infrastructure and job availability. Again, those age structures, if there's a large elderly population, you may need to take a look at that community and say we need to be allocating our resources more towards healthcare and elderly care. But again, it's concerning as our populations continue to grow. What is the carrying capacity of Earth? What is that K in our equation? You may have heard about carbon footprints. We often talk about leaving ecological footprints, and this is essentially an estimate of how much land and how many resources are required by each person, and how much do we need to produce in order to provide all of the consumption needs of all of the people on the planet, and also how can we account for all the waste that is produced as we're consuming those resources. So we have to constantly compare our demand for resources with our biocapacity, so living, what the Earth has capacity to hold, and how we can renew the resources that we're using up so that we can proliferate as a species and pass our natural resources onto our future generations. So we need to consider this idea of sustainability. This is the goal of and developing a strategy to manage our resources so that we're conserving our resources in ways that will continue to meet our needs and the needs of our future generations. Right now, it doesn't look so good. We're really not doing a good job of moving forward in a sustainable way. We're already exceeding our global footprint that we're leaving behind. So this overpopulation and consumption of resources, as well as destruction of natural resources, all of these things are severely threatening our ability to be a sustainable planet, which is why it's such an important conversation for you all to be having as you continue your education. And that's all that I have for today. Not to leave it on a totally sour note, I think that we have a real opportunity with folks like you learning about these things to turn this around and to become a more sustainable country and planet. So thanks for listening today, folks. Let me know, of course, if you have any questions at all, and I'll be here to answer them. Have a good one.